Today, I'm going to present you the 30 most common top interview questions. They are going to include firstly behavioral questions, then some JavaScript, some front-end stuff. Then it's going to dive deeper into generic backend questions. We're going to also have some like DevOps stuff. It's going to include data structures, algorithms, system design. Let's dive deep. My name is Alex from Dev School, and we coached more than 50 engineers in 2025 alone. We helped them get higher paid jobs in 1 to 3 months with an average salary increase of 25%. We work all across the world: Europe, USA, Canada, Brazil, Argentina, and some parts of Asia even. Now that you know who I am, let's jump in. The first and most common question that I see people massively unprepared for is, tell me about yourself. Here is how I would answer it. I would generally go firstly for like a brief career arc overview of my whole career, current role and skills that you want to go for and why you are here. So something like, I'm a full stack developer with X amount of experience, currently focus on this and that. And I'm excited in this all because you also tie it back up to them. This is like very vague, but I'm trying to go through these questions as quickly as possible. So the next question would be, why are you interested in this position? You would need to connect your skills and goals to their specific mission, product, or tech stack. Just show that you've researched them. Just don't give them a generic answer. I feel like where most people go wrong, they either tied up to they just need a job or money, whatever. Show that you research them, they will greatly appreciate it. The third one is, tell me about a time you disagree with a teammate. Now we dive deeper more into those like qualifying questions, and here they test you more or less on how you react in situation where disagreement happens, and it will eventually happen. Or if you don't disagree, like why are you not like pushing out for changes? How I handle this is I describe the disagreement, how you listened, how you presented your case with data and reasoning. That's very important. And the resolution. Focus on collaboration over winning, because it's not about winning the argument. It's actually about pushing the organization forward and moving the project forward. One general tip is use the STAR method in all of these questions. The 4 is, one of our core values at the company is X. Give me an example where you demonstrated that core value. I would generally prepare 3 to 4 stories that can flex to different values, like these, like 3 to 4 different STAR stories. Tell a specific situation where your actions embody that value with measurable impact. The R in STAR is for a result. So this is where you kind of say what the impact was when you implemented that core value. And again, here you also must research them so you know what they like. Maybe you can also tie it up to multiple values that they have inside the company. All of the companies have some sort of values, and sometimes they're kind of repeating. So if you prepare 3 or 4 stories, you can kind of mold them to the different situations, so to say. The 5th one is, tell me about a time you made a mistake or where a project that failed. Here, you want to own the mistake. You want to show ownership without excuses. Explain, what you learned, how you apply that lesson going forward. I just hate to see people say that, oh, I haven't failed or whatever. That means that you don't really own the mistakes that you've made, and without making mistakes, we don't necessarily grow. It's kind of not possible to not make mistakes, essentially. The 6th question is, if a colleague is underperforming and impacting the team, how would you handle it? First, you want to explain how you had a private conversation first, maybe like a one-on-one, maybe it was during lunchtime, whatever, to understand their context. It might be something personal. It might not be necessarily connected with the professional sphere. You, of course, offer support just as any human being would. Set clear expectations, make them aware that you kind of noted that, and only escalate to management only if the behavior continues and it doesn't really change. Or, of course, depending on the situation, it can take some time for the behavior to change. Be reasonable with that. But here you don't want to say you're kind of a snitch as well, because nobody likes snitches. Then you have to mention that you're going to escalate it to management, because that's a professional organization, yada yada yada. They will like that. The 7th question is, tell me about a time you had to push back on a decision. Very common question. Explain why you disagreed, how you presented alternatives with evidence, and whenever you committed once a decision was made, even if it wasn't yours. If you also haven't done this in the real world during your job, I would highly advise you, if you like disagree with something, then that's a more political way. I know most people don't want to get into politics, but that's generally like how you play this game. So you either play or you don't. What was the most difficult technical challenge you had to face? Pick a specific problem, explain your like debugging, like problem solving process, and highlight the outcome and what you learned. Again, you can use the star method for most of these behavioral questions. Again, outcome driven, and what you learned shows proactiveness. Most common question that it will come up, that's one of the requirements that they can ruthlessly cut you on, is what are your salary expectations? So give a researched range based on data, like market data, or redirect. I'm focused on finding the right fit. What's the budget for this role? Here we kind of go into a bit of like negotiations. Sometimes they can be upfront about the budget, but most of the times they won't tell you and they will push back after you ask this question. Sometimes you can be a bit more passive just to kind of go through the process. You can be like, I'm not sure about the range that I want to get now. Let's get to the process. You can evaluate me and then we can talk if it's in like the HR screen. Always have a researched range based on market data. Sometimes the market data in the internet can be lower than what you actually can get, but don't walk into the interview without knowing your word, and don't go below it, and don't be surprised if they offered you something after you gave them a range. Wait, John has a question. A lot of times our expectations are in the job application itself, and it's not a range, just a single number. Yeah, that's right. And when that happens, you can just say, yeah, I just saw the job listing and I'm fine with that. And if you're not fine with that, just don't apply it whatsoever, because it doesn't make sense. I mean, sometimes if they really like you, they can give you more than what they accounted for, but you just gotta, you gotta be good. So the 10th question for the behavioral side is, do you have any questions for us? And I feel like a lot of people ask unnecessary questions here. They don't really prepare anything. So that's why I put it here, because it always comes up and people are generally very unprepared for this. Ask questions that you cannot Google. Ask about like specific team challenges, what success looks like in 6 months is a very common answer to this question, but still it's pretty good. It gives you an idea of what you can aim for and what you can strive to achieve during that role, or how they approach certain event happening in the role. Generally ask stuff that you cannot Google. Here we're moving into more JavaScript related questions. What are the different data types and data structures in JavaScript? This is the most basic questions. There is primitives and there's like structures, right? So the primitives, string, number, boolean, no, identified, num, symbol, and big int. The non-primitives, objects, arrays, map, sets, and there's like quick map and like quick set. If you don't know that, that's a very, very big red flag. The second, question about JavaScript is, what is the event loop? How does it work and why does it exist? The event loop allows JavaScript to be non-blocking by offloading asynchronous tasks, timers, networking requests, etc., to the browser, then pushing their callbacks to the queue once the call stack is empty. Here you can dive deeper. I've just put a general sentence here. You can dive deeper into our architecture. You can dive deeper into like stuff like event demultiplexer. You can talk about this topic for like 5 to 10 minutes if you want, and it's very crucial part of JavaScript as a whole. You can talk about the implementation in the browser versus the server in Node.js. There's all sorts of ways that you can tackle this question. Next question is, what is the this keyword? This refers to the object that's executing the current function. It's value dependent on how the function is called. So the method, constructor, arrow function, or explicitly binding. The next question would be, what is scope? And scope determines where variables are accessible in your code. There is global scope, there is function and block scope. So you can explain in details each of those scopes. You can go in detail about like hoisting, right? But generally, this is what like scope is, and it's a fundamental thing from JavaScript. The next question would be to explain the CSS box model. Every element is a box consisting of content, padding, border, and margin from inside out. So border box makes width and height, including padding and border, which simplifies layout calculations. So you can go into more in depth. You can even like draw it if they let you. By the way, I have combined all of the concepts in a nice cheat sheet for you to study before each interview. The link to it will be in the comments. This cheat sheet includes the core concepts. It includes everything that we said. It includes like OP principles, runtime, so front end, TypeScript, like backend, front end stuff. It includes databases. It includes like data structures and algorithms, design parameters, principles. This is the first document that I ever made when I was starting out, and I feel like it will help you out. I know it did for me. So now moving on. What is a call stack and how does it work? The call stack tracks function execution in last in, first out order. And when you call a function, it's pushed on, and when it's returned, it's popped off. This is a fundamental part of JavaScript. I don't give like such a generic answer, but since, this video is kind of like rapid. But again, if you don't know the call stack, concept, go ahead and learn it. You can also talk about the stack as a structure itself, because the call stack is based on that essentially. Moving on to what is rate limiting and why is it important. Rate limiting is restricting how many requests a user or IP can make within time window, protects against abuse, DDoS attacks, prevents server overload, and ensures fair resource distribution across users. You can again use this in system design questions. If you don't know this topic, look it up again. So what is middleware and how does it work? So middleware are functions that sit between the request and response in your server pipeline. They can modify request, check authentication, log data, or short circuit the chain before reaching your route handler. If you don't know middlewares, I don't know if you've built any backends. I know middleware as a term might be different from language to language, but essentially each language has this concept inside of it. But again, if you like don't know this, that's how you implement, authentication and authorization, which is the next question, the difference between authentication and authorization. So authentication is the verification part, so who you are, login with password, OAuth, whatever. Authorization is kind of the implementation. It determines who can access what. So these are like roles, permission, middleware checks, etc. Right? And it's important for you to know how to implement each one so you can dive deeper into details about it. So what is caching? How do you implement it? Caching is storing frequently accessed data for faster retrieval. You can implement caching in different ways with browser, CDN, Redis, or HTTP cache headers. So there is different ways, cookies, etc. The next question would be, give me an example of different API styles. These are like the REST, GraphQL, gRPC, WebSockets. SOAP is, more legacy based, but still used widely. I would generally recommend you to check everything, try to implement it yourself, maybe run like a small project just to see how each of these work and where you can use them. You most probably implemented one or two, but again, I would generally try to implement everything from here just to see how it works. And if you get a question about each one, you can answer it in more detail, if that makes sense. The next question would be, what are the OP principles? Again, very common question. And you can bring it back to encapsulation, abstraction, inheritance, polymorphism. You can explain each one in more detail. You can get asked like in specifics about each individual one. And also there is property inheritance in JavaScript. You can check that out as well. What are the solid principles? They're guidelines for maintaining maintainable and flexible code. Again, this is the first one is the single responsibility, open and closed, list of substitution, interface segregation, dependency inversion. I would want you to maybe not explain each of them, but at least explain like some of them in more detail and kind of have them in the back of your head. Read them through before the interview using the cheat sheet that I sent you. So what are the principles of functional programming? Pure functions without side effects, immutability, first class functions, functional composition, and declarative over imperative code. I would love for people that I ask this question to go more in depth And again, you can get asked all of these in different questions. So it's important to know all of them. And if you haven't like functionally programmed, sometimes that's to be expected. But as like languages like Go are becoming more and more popular, you kind of have those questions coming up more and more, especially for, those types of interviews. What are the difference between SQL and NoSQL databases? SQL is like structured tables, rigid schema, ACID compliant, relationships, Postgres, MySQL, and NoSQL are like flexible schemas, horizontal scaling, various models, a document type. We have like MongoDB and Redis, and it's important to know, I would say, each of them, maybe not implement all of them, but at least know where you can put them and use them, especially in those like system design interviews. They can ask you that specific question, like why would you use Redis over MongoDB, etc., and you kind of have to know the answer. The next natural question would be, what are transactions? Transaction is a sequence of database operations that execute as a single unit, either all succeed or all fail. That's called rollback. Pretty common question. The other common question would be if NoSQL databases have transactions, but I won't answer that. I will leave that for the comments. So what is ACID? I kind of mentioned it before. ACID is atomicity, hour noting, consistency, valid state, isolation, concurrent transactions, don't interfere, durability, committed to data persistence. I would love for people here to also explain in more detail why it exists, what it is used for, etc. You get the point. How load balancing works. A load balancer distributes incoming traffic across multiple servers using algorithms like round robin, least connections, or IP hash. It improves availability and prevents any single server from being overwhelmed. A very, very important topic, especially for system design interviews. How do you monitor application health? This is where they will try to challenge you on what are the production requirements, right? So use logging, structured logs, metrics. You can use Prometheus or Grafana, uptime checks, error tracking. You can use Sentry, and alerting for anomalies or like threshold branches, like some people use Slack, etc. And last but not least is, have you heard of Big O and what it is? Big O describes how an algorithm time or space requirements grow as input size increases. Big O of 1 is constant, Big O of n is linear, Big O squared is quadratic, etc. Again, sometimes in those like lead code style interviews, you get into that. It's important for you to check out this topic regardless, because showing that you know the time or space complexity of your code is more or less the time, but yeah, it's important. Here are some honorable mentions. What is hoisting? This keyword in JavaScript. How do you ensure accessibility in web applications? Can you explain the critical rendering path? What is Docker and why you use containers? What is sharding? What is memoization? What is database normalizations? Like a theorem or any other like system design specific questions. These are some of the questions that I wanted to put in, but I wanted to also time constrain it, so this doesn't become like a hour and a half video. We have a paid program and it's one-on-one. I only have a few spots left at a time each month. It's usually we create a custom roadmap for you to follow to get to your goals, whether that's a job as fast as possible or increasing your salary, upskilling technically. There will be a link somewhere.